Welcome to Experiments in Poetry, episode 22. We will be discussing the author Lewis Carroll and his poem Jabberwocky. Lewis Carroll was an English author born in 1832, and he is most famous for his novels that center around the adventures of Alice. So, hence the Alice inspired look today. Typically, she is characterized by having blonde hair with a black ribbon and wearing white and blue on her adventures. His first novel, Alice's Adventures in Wonderland, was written in 1865, and the sequel novel, Through the Looking Glass and What Alice Found There, was written in 1871. And in this novel is where the poem Jabberwocky appears. I really enjoy the poem Jabberwocky, and it really stands out for me because it is a piece of writing um, called literary nonsense. And what that means is, even though it's written in a traditional um, poetic structure, and the form that this poem takes is called a ballad, but the fact that most of the words that make up the poem do not actually exist in English, and it kind of is just like made up nonsense. And but it works, and I'm choosing this poem because I want to just say that, well, I'm choosing this poem for multiple reasons. Um, the first one is it's just fun. It's fun to read, and it's fun to read. It's fun to pronounce these words, and it kind of brings you back to being a child again. I The second reason is because I think it shows that a high level of creativity to be able to compose a poem made almost entirely of non English words, but yet the reader can understand, or kind of forces their mind to put together its own world, so that you are kind of like a part of the process of what does that mean exactly, and then you in your own mind can kind of come up with your own story or vision as to what that means. And the third reason why I really like it is because I think that um, a lot of people, when they are writing, they get maybe self-conscious about um, what they are doing and saying, and this just reminds you of, hey, you can even, if you need to, just make something up for that. I think it just shows that you can be flexible in your writing, and you don't have to be um, so contained into what English already has to offer. The language is growing and fluid and flexible, and you can just have fun with it. Um, so the fourth reason is because it does just remind you of being a child again, and there's something about the way the brain works. Written by a child, not written by an adult for a child, because it kind of reminds me of a child trying to say a really complicated word that he heard an adult saying, and they just kind of like pronounce it wrong, like they're trying to say, I don't know, like delicious or something, and they're like, it's delicious, and you're like, what? That's so cute. And so it kind of reminds me like that, um, of an actual child trying to um, tell a story and using kind of words for the first time, and thinking, did I pronounce that correctly? I remember when I was younger, and I'm using a word, like maybe when, I don't know, being really, really young, and just wondering, did I say that right? um, and It's really, really cute. It does seem like it's actually like a child telling the story or pronouncing these words for the first time and just mispronouncing them. Uh, and the final reason is because it just says something really interesting about the human brain and how we process language. So, um, there have been many studies that show how the brain develops and how a child starts to mimic sounds when they are first able to um, make noises. They babble in all languages. So when they're very, very young, the elasticity of the sounds that come from the child's mouth uh, can form into any language very, very easily. So that might have something to do with why this poem reminds me, even though it's in gibberish, of what a small child might do as it's playing and learning and trying to pronounce the words. And then what happens eventually over time is that your language, or I should say, the repertoire of sounds that the baby is able to make becomes more and more specific for a particular language. And as you grow older and you're an adult, the language becomes like second nature to you. And what happens is, um, this is why it's always nice to proofread, use spell correction and grammar correction, or grab a friend and have them read your work or take a break from writing and go back. As when you're an adult and the language is just so second nature to you, you will just, even if a sentence doesn't make sense, as in nonsensical literary writing that is featured here in Jabberwocky, your brain will just organize it into something that does make sense without you even knowing it. As a scientist, I have interacted with many English as a second language scientists from around the world, and sometimes they'll get mad and be like, "Why did you not? You need to, correct me. Always correct me if I'm saying something wrong." And I was like, "Well, I have to actually really, really, yes, I can tell that you have an accent and stuff. And the first time that you maybe say something incorrect, my mind picks up on that and it's like, oh, that's an odd phrasing. And it's wrong. But if you keep interacting with that same person and they're making that same mistake, my brain will just, after noticing it the first time that they said something wrong or pronounced it wrong, my mind will just flip it to the correct way, and I won't even notice it anymore. And so that's why proofreading and stuff like that becomes critical. Also, they have done scientific studies, and it's very, very interesting. They'll have like a sentence, and they'll put like three is's and some extra thes and ahs in it, and then they'll take random people on the street and say, "Can you read this paragraph for me?" And even though the paragraph was utter nonsense, when the English speaking readers were reading it, they read it as though it was perfect grammar. So your brain does not necessarily take in everything on the page. When you're used to reading like novels, and whole paragraphs, and you're reading at a fast rate. In order to do that, your brain doesn't actually look at every word and letter. It kind of skims the sentence really quickly, or the paragraph, and will put like what the next word, or what your brain thinks the sentence would make sense as. So it is really critical to have people look over your work. So, and it's funny because I'm saying, well, Jabberwocky makes no sense, and I really like the poem, but I like it because it reminds me of that. It reminds me of, even though it makes no sense, my mind is going to be like, when it first hears that word, like for instance, let's get into the first stanza of Jabberwocky. So here we go. 'Twas brillig, and the slithy toves did gyre in the gimble in the wabe. All mimsy were the bur groves, all the mome ras outgabe. So, our first stanza of the poem. But yet, my mind paints a story for me. It paints a story of, there's something afoot here. There's, something 'twas brillig. I can get a sense of what brillig is. And, it seems like something's afoot, something's amiss, kind of like you feel something's about to happen, like the way the air pressure feels different right before a storm, right? No, 'twas brillig, and I just, that's what 'twas brillig means to me. It means nothing in Little English, but in my mind, my brain says, yeah, that's 'twas brillig. Town because it's English, but it's not quite English. And it seems like you're in like an alternate universe or a different world. And that's kind of how Alice in the Wonderland works, right? It's a nonsensical fairy tale. Um, so here we are in stanza number 2. Beware the Jabberwock, my son, the jaws that bite, the claws that catch. Beware the Jubjub bird, and shun the frumious Bandersnatch. So, in this stanza, as I said, it was brillig in the first one. And so in here, it just, you get this thing that there's a monster lurking called the Jabberwock. Maybe that was the brillig sensation I was getting in the first stanza. And, this Jabberwock has claws and it can bite. And there's also fearsome creatures such as the Jubjub bird, and you need to also stay away from that Bandersnatch creature. All the monsters that are you know, um in the web, you know, all the monsters that are in the web. And third stanza, it's he took his vorpal sword in hand. Long time the manxome foe he sought. So rested he by the tum-tum tree and stood a while in thought. So here, it looks like the sun is, going into the web. His son is going to go into the web, and he's leaning against, a tum tum tree. And of course, this is a made up tree. There's no such thing as a tum tum tree. But your mind gets to play. What does a tum tum tree looks like? And he's waiting underneath this tum tum tree, leaning against it with his vorpal sword. And again, there's no word for vorpal. So what would you think a vorpal sword would look like? I think it would look something, like a Viking would carry, something big, because, the Bandersnatch, the Jubjub bird, and the Jabberwocky sound like fearsome creatures, and I wouldn't want to go in necessarily with a pocket knife. So, um, and, he's standing there thinking about what he's going to do when he sees these monsters. So in the fourth stanza, and as the oofish thought he stood, the Jabberwock, with eyes aflame, came whiffling through the toogie wood and burbled as it came. So, again, it's just a lot of fun. And, um, you know, again, as an oofish thought he stood. Oofish, is that kind of like foolish, like, or, not really thinking, how can you just stand there and lean against a tree so relaxed when there's a creature as future, there's a creature as fearsome as a Jabberwock nearby. And then all of a sudden, there's the Jabberwock, and he has eyes of flame, and he's whiffling through the toggy wood. And again, there is no such thing as a toggy wood, but what would you imagine it looks like? I don't know. I think he's whiffling through the toggy wood. So the whiffling just sounds like we have a thing called a whiffle bat, and that's kind of like a hollow bat, and the ball is also hollow. So I'm just imagining that these are like more like bushes. They're uh, not thick trees, more like brush that he is running through, and he burbled as it came. No, what is a burble? It's not really a word. You have to think. Burble. I don't know. What does that mean to you? Burble. I don't think it's quite a growl. Maybe like something between a whimper and a growl. Or some sort of vocalization of a warning that some predator might make. But you get to play with it in your mind. Stanza 5. 1, 2, 1, 2, and through the purple blade went snicker snack. He left it dead, and with its head he went galumphing back. So it's pretty straightforward, but again, vorpal blade, snicker snack. I guess that means a stabbing stab, or maybe a slicey slice. But anyway, he beheaded he beheaded the fearsome creature, and he went back galumphing. Maybe that's a triumphant return. Again, as a child, you might think of triumphant, instead say galumphing instead of triumphant. So it's really cute. It just reminds me of something like a 4-year-old would say. Oh, frabjous jay, and hast thou slain the Jabberwock? Come to my arms, my beamish boy. Oh, frabjous day, calloo, callay, he chortled in his joy. Well, frabjous day. Maybe that's a joyous day, as a little child might say it. Frabjous, so joyous. Calloo, callay, hooray, hooray, he chortled in his joy. Was that he choked? Did he have a heart attack? Did he laugh very vigorously? Who knows? How do you see it? And then the final stanza. 'Twas brillig and the slithy toves did gyre and gimble in the wabe. All minsy were the bur groves and the moon wraths out grabe. So it begins as it ends. So the man at the beginning of the poem was afraid of the Jabberwock, and then at the end it seems that with or without the Jabberwock, the world is still a very dangerous place, and life goes on. So the other foes are the Jub bird and the Bandersnatch, and perhaps there's other Jabberwocks there, and your work is never done, and you just rinse and repeat. And to me, again, he was brilliant at kind of Lewis Carroll was brilliant at showing what the adult kind of world looks like in the eyes of a child. How you might watch your parents, do the daily grind and work, but for them it all doesn't make sense of why you would do that. I'm reminded of my own child when he went to school for the first time, and he was in in a preschool prior to it, but it more had like a Montessori kind of style, and there was different stations, and then the kids just kind of like, as long as they did a certain amount of each activity a day, it was fine. But then he went to a regular school when he was in kindergarten for elementary school. And so there, he just had a hard time adjusting. And he was just like, it doesn't make sense. It's crazy. And I am told I have to do art. And I don't feel like doing art, but then I'm told I have to do it. And then when I do it and I'm finally into my picture, then my teacher tells me, just as I'm getting into it, it's time to stop. And now it's time to read a book. but I don't want to read the book. I want to finish my drawing. And then by the time I get into the book, she stops only a chapter in and says, now we got to have a snack, but I'm not hungry. And then I still want to finish my art. And what about that story? Why stop in the middle of it? And then I'm told I have to do math, and I love doing math and I want to keep doing math. But then I'm told that I have to stop and go to music class. And then I'm told I have to go to a bathroom, but I don't have to go to the bathroom. And so he's just kind of like talking about his day and how, just it just seems so nonsensical to him that there was this, constant, how an adult might see it as structure, from 8 to 8:30, it's attendance, from 9 to 10, it's art, and 10 to 11, it's reading, and 11 to 11:15, it's snack time, and, and then math or whatever. And it's like in blocks of 40 minutes to an hour. And we are so conditioned as adults and see that as, yeah, that's, just the way. You don't even notice. Oh, that's the way it is. But when a kid sees that for the first time, he's just like, this is crazy. Can I just finish coloring my piece? And then when I'm done with that, I'll just go over here and I'll work on my math. And when I'm hungry, I'll eat. And when I have to go to the bathroom, I'll just go to the bathroom. And, it's just crazy that, your whole day is scheduled out. I'm going to eat exactly at this time. And kids have it a little worse because they may even have their bathrooms scheduled at certain times of day. And that's just one example of how, when you see Alice and her story of Alice in the Wonderland, how weird that life is sometimes, and how we don't even realize as adults that we are just so conditioned as to how to behave in society that we don't even realize our conditioning any longer. And we just see it as, this is the way it is. This is just how you do. Like, what do you mean? And you don't even realize that actually it doesn't kind of make sense. It doesn't make sense that, you know, every 30 minutes your brain just has to totally switch activities just because there's a time slot. Why? It's totally insane. It is. I didn't even realize it until he said that. So episodes, but I'm reminding myself now to make sure that I do it. That if you have any poems that you are interested in or any song lyrics that you would like me to cover, please comment below, or you can send me an email at wendy@experimentsinpoetry.com, and I will do my best to see what I can cover and give you my review or feedback on. If you enjoy listening to my reviews, please hit the subscribe and like button. Thanks for listening. Bye-bye.